Hello and welcome to LFC Focus. It is pre-match build-up showtime with the international break finally over. It is of course not the last time we will have to go through that 2 weeks of hell this season. I think the next one is in mid-October or somewhere like that. But for now at least, proper football is back. Football we actually care about. Football that's worth watching. Football that involves Liverpool, the team we all are actually interested in seeing how they get on. And of course, we're kicking things off this weekend straight back into Premier League action with a game against Newcastle at Anfield on Saturday at 12:30. It's not the ideal kickoff time when you just come out of the international break. We know Jurgen Klopp hates these early kickoffs at the best of times, especially when it's on a Saturday and when it's coming out from an international break with quite a few players coming back late. You know, all the England guys only played their last game on Tuesday, I think it was, in the friendly against Kosovo, so they're certainly not going to be, 100% fit, especially when you consider the fact that this is the start of quite an intense block of fixtures. You know, people talk a lot about the December period as being one of the most difficult ones, but I think this one, considering it comes actually a lot earlier on in the season, where players haven't quite found their rhythm in a way that they normally have done by that December period, the fact that you've got this game at the weekend, then we've got a Champions League game midweek, then another Premier League game, then you've got a League Cup game in midweek, then you've got another Premier League game after that. The games do come thick and fast in this little period, and especially last season it was quite difficult because we had a lot of big games there. We had PSG, we had Napoli away, Chelsea away, City at home, and it didn't derail our season. I think we came out about as well as we possibly could have done from those fixtures, but it is a very tough period, and obviously, as I said, Jurgen Klopp doesn't like to start it off with that 12:30 kickoff when it comes after the international break. Fortunately, I think a lot of the other nations, not England, but some of the African ones, Senegal and Egypt, who've got Mane and Salah respectively, have actually been quite nice in terms of how they've used the players. There's something about them releasing Salah and Mane so that they won't be playing any more internationals until November, so they'll thankfully be able to sit out the October ones, which is good news for us because it means they can either have a rest, which I'm sure Jurgen Klopp would love them to have, or if he thinks otherwise, he can get them on the training ground and get them working hard and get them tuned into one another and getting them tuned into the Liverpool way as we all want them to be. So 12:30 kickoff, it's not ideal, and against Newcastle, this is the kind of game that I think a couple seasons ago we would have absolutely bricked it for. A team who we just know are going to defend for their lives. A team who we know are going to set up with 5 at the back and 4 in front of them, and then just one poor sod running up and down the halfway line with absolutely nothing to do for about 89 minutes of the match. We know that's how they're probably going to set up, especially because that's how they set up against Spurs, and I'll come on later on in the video a little bit more onto how I think Newcastle are going to play. But previously, that would have scared us because it was the kind of game that Liverpool really, really struggle with, and I think one thing we really showed last season was that we'd got over the hump with regards to those types of games. We'd worked out how to break down teams that just sat deep, played a low block, didn't really look to attack, and just tried to defend for their lives for 90 minutes at Anfield. So I think now we go into this game knowing that it could be tough and it could end up being tight, but whatever happens, you'd still back Liverpool to come out with the 3 points. And obviously, with City hot on our tails, I think they have got Norwich later on in the day. They've got the 5:30 kickoff. I think that's away from home there as well. So could be interesting. You never know. Norwich have started the season pretty well. Got some good results. They've got a solid goal scorer in Timu Pukki. City obviously missing Aymeric Laporte as well. I've already spoken too much about Man City because it's way too early on in the season to be getting into all of that. But, I think we're so desperate for the Premier League title that we are getting a little bit obsessed with how exactly Liverpool are going to win it. So yeah, playing before City, that's good. Playing on Saturday at 12:30, that's not so good. But obviously, you'd back Liverpool to deal with any kind of difficult situation that's thrown at them. So team news going into the game. Obviously, everyone wants to know how Alisson is progressing. You'd think that maybe over the international break, we'd get a bit of a positive update. The party line that the club are towing is still about just, there's no scheduled recovery time. They're not putting a time scale on it because it's an injury he hasn't suffered beforehand, so they don't know how long it's going to take to recover. And obviously, they do want to make sure that he is 100% fit before he comes back, because we don't want him being seen as a weakness in the side. We don't want a recurrence of the injury that keeps him out for even longer. So for the foreseeable future, we are going to continue to see Adrian San Miguel, formerly of West Ham, now of Liverpool Football Club, in goal. And it's quite interesting, he was actually put through a bit more intense training over the international break. John Achterberg did an interview on the club website where he basically talked about the fact that up until the international break, they had pretty much no time to work with Adrian whatsoever. You know, he signs a couple days before the season starts and then gets thrown in, and they could not have possibly anticipated that that was going to happen. Then obviously you've got the Super Cup, no time to train for that. Then you've got the fact that he experiences that injury after the Super Cup before the Southampton game, so he barely even trains in between those two. So they haven't really had much time, and obviously you think with a goalkeeper, how much training is there to do? You know, just stop the ball before it goes in the net. But when you're playing for Liverpool, there's all sorts of other stuff about distribution, about dribbling, about being quick off your line and stuff like that, and about commanding your space in a certain way that I'm sure he wasn't doing at West Ham. And I think the idea is basically to stop him being perceived as a weakness, because we saw that a little bit. Obviously, the error he makes against Southampton, teams are going to try and capitalise on the fact that he's not a ball-playing goalkeeper, playing in a ball-playing defence, and therefore there might be some joy to be had there. And I think that's what they will have been working on a lot more than just, you know, the basic stuff like how to stop the ball going in the back of the net. It will be more about the technical side of his game and making him be more in tune with the defence. So what you'd hope now is that no longer becomes a problem, because obviously what was great about Alisson was that he and the defence sort of worked so well together. There was a strong understanding. Him and Van Dijk always knew whose ball it was and stuff like that. And we haven't really seen that yet with Alisson. We have kind of seen that the players don't really trust him as much. I think after the Southampton thing, they're a bit more careful when it comes to passing back to him. They wouldn't put him under the same pressure that they put Alisson under, because they know that he's not going to be able to cope with it as well. But now, hopefully, things are going to have changed a little bit. Obviously, he's 32 years old. It's hard to teach an old dog new tricks. And this is obviously a very new side of the game that he's probably never really been exposed heavily to before. But hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll see a little bit of a difference, and he will put in another good performance to build on his first clean sheet for the club that he thankfully got against Burnley. So yeah, the long and short of it, too long didn't read, Adrian is going to be playing in goal. Apart from that, other team news, Naby Keita is still out. We had first team training today, and he was nowhere to be seen. We don't really know where he is. We haven't really received an update either, which is a little bit concerning, because obviously even though there's no timescale on Alisson, we've at least heard news about it. Jurgen Klopp has obviously he's been asked about it more, and there's more demand for Alisson news because he's such a key component of the side, whereas, you know, we can get on quite well without Naby Keita because our midfield options are absolutely fantastic. But we all want to see him coming back into the side, especially with this glut of games we're going to experience. You'd hope that he'd have been able to get some minutes there, even if it is just, you know, maybe the League Cup game and then the home game against Leicester a little bit further down the line. But as it stands, we're not going to be seeing any Naby Keita. He still hasn't returned to training yet, and he is one that we also don't have a timescale on, which is a bit of a shame. But coming on to who we're actually going to be using in the starting 11, or at least who I think is going to be in the starting 11, and I don't mean to blow my own trumpet, but looking at how I predicted it, I've done pretty well in the past. I think it's fair to say I think the last few lineups I've got either bang on or only missed by one, so I'm pretty pleased with that. If you know, do listen to this segment because I tend to get it right, is essentially what I'm saying, again, without wanting to blow my own trumpet. But obviously one that I think I can safely say I'm probably going to get right, barring any last minute aberration, is the goalkeeper. It is going to be Adrian, and we've already talked about him loads, so we're not going to talk about him anymore. Moving on to the defence, I think this kind of picks itself as well. Virgil van Dijk, obviously. Joel Matip, I think, obviously. It'd be interesting to see how much football Joe Gomez gets over the next run of games, especially whether he gets any of the big games. I think obviously you look at the MK Dons game and you think he's probably nailed on to start there, but thinking more about maybe Napoli away, maybe Leicester a little bit further down the line, maybe even that Chelsea match as like a right back or something, or even going with that for the Napoli away match as well. I hope to see him get a little bit of football, because I do think he's got a strong future at the club, and he is a fantastic option to have at centre back, provided he gets enough football that he retains match sharpness. So I do think he'll get some, I hope he'll get some game time over the next few games, but I don't think it's going to be this weekend, because I think when you come back from the international break, you want to hit the ground running, you want to get off to a flying start, so you don't take any risks, and you go with the centre-back pairing, which has been absolutely fantastic so far this season. So Virgil van Dijk and Joel Matip in the centre. The fullbacks also pick themselves. Obviously Trent Alexander-Arnold, you know, came back fairly late from international duty. He was one of the players who played, I'm pretty sure it's the full 90 minutes against Kosovo on Tuesday for England. Thankfully, obviously, that's only within England, so there aren't really any huge amount of air miles that he's had to deal with. But it'll be interesting to see what Jurgen Klopp does around that. I think he definitely plays him for this game, but as I said, maybe we see something like Joe Gomez at right back for the Napoli game. It kind of depends how exactly Trent responds over the next few training sessions, whether he seems like he might need a rest or not. And then obviously the other left back, even though he's played both internationals for Scotland, will be Andrew Robertson. And then moving on to the midfield, again, I don't think there's going to be any changes here. I think maybe if Jurgen Klopp Klopp is trying to anticipate exactly what Newcastle are going to do. He goes for something slightly more attacking. I would quite like to see an Oxlade-Chamberlain in there. You know, obviously Jurgen Klopp has been trying to work him more and more into the starting 11 over the last few games. I think he got minutes against Burnley. He got the start against Southampton. So I think we're going to see a fair amount of him as Klopp tries to get him up to full match sharpness, because, you know, whether or not he's going to be, you know, in the first 11 every single week, we need him as an option. And given that he's still recovering from that injury, because he was out for so long and it's sort of been a bit stop-start in terms of his recovery. Obviously he came back at the end of last season, but then has the entire summer off as well before pre-season comes back around. So I think Jurgen Klopp is going to work on getting him into games as much as possible. So maybe we see him at some point, but I think from the start we go with the tried and trusted formula that's worked so far this season, and that is Fabinho at the base, Henderson a little bit further forward, and then Gini Wijnaldum on the other side, kind of level, I guess, with Jordan Henderson. And then the front three is another one that just picks itself: Salah, Firmino and Mane. So taking a little look at Newcastle then, obviously the game that I'm going to kind of follow as the blueprint for what they're going to try and do successfully against us is the game they played against Spurs on match day 3. It was away from home. It was against a big six side. They won it 1-0. They defended well. They took their one big opportunity on the break and came away with the 3 points. And I think they'd be satisfied with a point this weekend, but you kind of got to set up to win every single game, because there is, I think, was it Jurgen Klopp who essentially said that there's no way of playing for a draw? He's been asked in the past, you know, are you just going to go for a point this weekend? Would you be satisfied with a point? And when he's drawn games, he's been asked, were you playing for that? And he said that isn't really a thing. No manager sets out thinking, right, go out and get a single point. You go out to win the games, and sometimes a draw is a good thing, sometimes it's a bad thing. I think a draw would be a good thing for Newcastle this weekend, and that will definitely be reflected in the way they set up. You know, looking at the way they played against Tottenham, they defended very deep. As I said, it was a bank of 5 defensively with a 4 in front of them, and then Joey Linton, or however it's pronounced, their new £40 million star striker, just patrolling the halfway line and trying to get forward and take his chances wherever possible. And obviously he does get the goal, so that's maybe something to be worried about. Although looking at the goal, if I'm being perfectly honest, it's kind of just naff defending from Spurs. It's not like he makes a really smart run. He just stands between their centre-backs, and I think it's Almiron on the left wing just goes, oh, okay, and then lobs the ball over to him, and whoever the Spurs centre-back is, I think it's Davinson Sanchez, just goes, oh, he's got the ball now, and then Joe Linton just runs at the goal and slots it underneath Hugo Lloris. So as long as our players are looking where he is, they will avoid a situation like that fairly easily. I think in the other ways they attack, they do actually commit a fair amount of players on the break, to be fair to them. Certainly when they're in possession and they don't see a breaking opportunity, they are a bit more cautious. But I think when they see the defensive line very, very high up, which has obviously been a bit of a talking point for Liverpool fans so far this season, there's chat of us playing a higher line. It's been denied by the coaching staff, so no one really knows what the truth is there. But the stats so far back it up that we have been playing a little bit higher up the pitch, and obviously Newcastle will look to capitalise on that. So I think when they do see opportunities, they'll pile men forward. You'll see Almiron, you'll see Joelinton, you'll see maybe Longstaff coming in deep from midfield to try and just kind of give them the numbers to create a counter-attack. So we've got to be wary of that. And so it's essentially a matter of the defence just being awake. You know, that happens a lot in these Liverpool games. It's something we talk about a lot with the goalkeeper, and I think it's the case with the defence as well, where they don't have to be brilliant for 90 minutes. They just have to be focused and then good enough for maybe 1 or 2 situations where they actually get put under a little bit of pressure, and I would wholeheartedly back our defence to do that. Obviously, Trent and Robertson, if Newcastle are defending deep, are probably going to be bombing on an awful lot, so I think maybe Fabinho in midfield is going to have to be a little bit vigilant to make sure that at any given time he's covering for those fullbacks, he's dropping a bit deep. If Matip or Van Dijk gets pulled out wide into one of Robertson or Trent's positions, he drops in as an extra centre-back and stuff like that. So it's all stuff that we kind of think about and think, oh, that's some interesting tactical battles. But for Liverpool, it's essentially second nature, because they're one of the best teams in the world. They're European champions. They are the world champions-elect, if you like. It'll be interesting to see how that goes in December, but obviously that is very far away and we won't talk about that just yet. But yeah, it's about defensive focus. It's about being careful, not getting caught out in silly situations. And sometimes, you know, they might put together a brilliant goal. I always think back when I think about playing these kind of games to that game against Crystal Palace, the 4-3. The first goal they scored was lauded as this brilliant way to beat Liverpool's press. It was essentially pass out from the back really quickly and just hope that the passes are pinpoint accurate and don't get cut out. And that's not really a formula you can replicate on a regular basis, because it was just down to moments of individual brilliance from Crystal Palace. And I think that's what Newcastle will try and look to repeat in this game at the weekend. So maybe that happens, maybe they score, and that is where we have to rely on the attack as well. And I think obviously they defend deep, as I said, but they did look quite rigid against Spurs. And I think if Spurs' attackers could have finished their dinner at least once, then they maybe would have come away with a better result. You know, Lucas Moura has quite a few shots on goal. Kane fluffs his lines late on. There's quite a few where they just take pot shots from outside the box because they've run out of ideas. And it's the kind of situations where I'd back our attack to actually get through there, because as I said, the defence looked rigid. So if the players are moving, if Salah's darting in behind, if Firmino's dropping deep and dropping wide, and Mane's cutting inside and then going to the byline and stuff like that, and you've got Henderson and Wijnaldum coming in deep, which is something we saw against Arsenal as well, then I think we can definitely break down their defence. And also, one interesting point I did pick up against Newcastle, they're very, very physical in the box, and they got away with it against Spurs. There are a couple of contentious penalty shouts. I think they were all 50-50s. There were ones where they were contact but not enough to bring them down. Rarely do they actually get the ball in those situations though. So I think it will be interesting. It kind of depends on the ref, and I'm interested to see who gets appointed and how exactly they want to approach the game. But I wouldn't be surprised if we see at least one penalty due to clumsy tackles from Newcastle, especially if our players play it right. And I'm not saying diving, but I'm saying when these Newcastle players make these kind of 50-50 tackles where they don't get the ball, they are essentially impeding the player, but not in such a way that the player's going to go down and it's going to be obvious to the referee that it's a penalty. So our players have basically got to make sure that they make it look like a foul. I'm trying to say this without basically saying dive, but they need to make sure that it's clear that they have been fouled. It's something Mo Salah's got better at, and he's been accused of diving as a result, but I don't think it is. I think it is literally just making it clear to the referee that you are being fouled. So our players have got to watch out for that a little bit, and hopefully that's something that Jurgen Klopp informs them of. But I think the key principle is just, you know, short, fast movements in and around the box, quick runs, difficult to process runs, you know, players drifting out of position into areas where maybe defenders aren't expecting them to be, and then catching them cold. Because the one thing you don't want to do is what we always did a couple seasons ago when we came up against these low blocks, which is pass to the side, play it out wide, play it back in, back to the centre-backs, forward to the midfielder, out to the sides, back in, a lot over and over and over and over and over again, until eventually someone like Fabinho or Wijnaldum or Henderson just gets the ball 30 yards from goal and thinks, I can't be bothered doing this anymore, and just ends up blamming it into Rose Ed with a hopeless shot from distance. That's what we need to avoid. That is kind of what Spurs were doing against Newcastle. Newcastle will be banking on us doing something similar, so we've just got to be very smart. I think an early goal definitely helps as well. Obviously, in the first 15 minutes, that kind of gives you a little bit of a boost and puts Newcastle down a little bit. If they go out and their whole plan is based on keeping a clean sheet and then maybe nicking a goal on the break or something like that, if we get an early goal, suddenly the task becomes really difficult. And you kind of see it with teams like that, where either they get a really good result or they just get battered 4-0 because they go 2-0 down early on and they completely lose the will to live and can't really be bothered anymore. That's what I want to see from Liverpool. Although, if we get a different scenario, I'd still back us to win. If we go 1-0 down, if it's 0-0 with 15 minutes to go, we've seen from this Liverpool side already, especially last season, that when it comes down to the crunch, they have got what it takes, and I'd back them to do it again this weekend. I'd rather they didn't, because it's a long run of games. We're going to have some tough games coming up, Napoli, Chelsea, obviously, and stuff like that, and I'd rather we got things off to an easy start. I think that's probably what will happen. I'm obviously going to back the Liverpool win, as I always do. I think it'll be another 3 points, retain that perfect record, 15 points, top of the league at the end of the weekend would be absolutely fantastic. And I think if I'm going for a score, I'd probably say it'll be 3-0 to Liverpool. So that is all today's video. Thank you guys very, very much for watching. If you did enjoy this video, as always, you guys know what to do by now. Hit that like button down there, hit that subscribe button there if you're new around here. Check out some of the other videos that I've done on the channel over the past few days. Don't forget to follow at LFC Focus TV on Twitter, and I'll be back on Saturday afternoon after we've hopefully beaten Newcastle to keep up that 100% record. Until then, bye for now.